Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. My name is James Batchelor and today we are taking a monthly look at used car values. Joining me as ever is CAP HPI's Director of Valuations, Derren Martin. Hello, Derren.
Hi James, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Always lovely to have you on, Derren. So let's just get stuck into it because I feel as though we've got quite a bit to talk about. So, what have we seen? Well, what have you been seeing in March?
It's been another interesting month for values. It's fairly unusual that values go up this month, but they have done. We've got a 0.5% move up at that 3-year benchmark point. So that's the third month in a row that we've seen values increase, albeit slightly. I think last month they went by 1%, this time by 0.5%. First 3 months of the year that we've not seen that before. So it's been a strong first quarter. We've never had all 3 months where there's been a valuation move up at the start of a year. So it is strong. The sort of the caveats around that this month have been older cars have started to soften. So we've got a 1.3% movement down at the 10-year point. And the other caveat is around electric vehicles, where it's quite volatile. It's probably a bit dangerous to talk about EVs in general on valuation terms because there's lots of different things happening to lots of different models now because of the movements down that have happened. Some have stabilized, some are still moving down. So it's been really interesting.
Well, we'll come back to older cars and EVs in a second. I just want to go back to your first point where you say you've never really seen 3 months of so strong and those upward movements. Firstly, over what kind of period are we talking about? And secondly, are you as surprised by that as I am? Because let's face it, I mean, we've been talking about strong used car prices for the last 3 years effectively, haven't we? And I would have thought, and I'm sure many people would have thought, the days of us being surprised about high used car prices are gone, but that doesn't seem to be the case now, does it?
No, so what I'm talking about is the first quarter of the year. So it's the
Yeah.
first time the first quarter. So we've been through January, February, and now March, and it's the first time all of those 3 months have increased in value since I've looked back at our records. We've had periods in 2021 where there were like 6 months of values going up. So it's not unheard of, but what is unusual is that first 3 month period, because you can tend to get a little bit of stability usually in January. February they can tend to go up slightly, and then March generally they will drop slightly, but this time we've had strength in all 3 months. So that's what I'm talking about there. Obviously, yeah, you're right, values are high anyway from what happened over certainly in 2021, and then a very stable 2022 where they didn't drop. So yeah, used values are strong, but we have been saying that we don't expect values to drop, to crash down at all. Obviously, used cars coming down in value is generally a fact of life. But sort of your question, has it taken by surprise? In December, nobody was particularly predicting a strong first quarter.
Yeah.
There was a bit of trepidation, a little bit of sort of, well, obviously the unknown. If you cast your mind back to December, cost of living was on everyone's lips. How was it going to be? We were saying there aren't going to be the same number of people logging on Boxing Day to go and look for on a used car website. But it has been strong. And because dealers didn't stock up, because they were worried about the first quarter, they've had to replenish stocks because consumer demand has been out there, and that's what's driven the values up. Obviously, 0.5% movement up is not huge, and there have been cars that have dropped in value, but it's still an overall upward movement. If you take electric vehicles out of that, it's a 0.8% movement up for petrol and diesel cars. So it is a strong period.
That's very interesting indeed. I mean, as we all know, obviously March is a plate change month. I mean, has that had any effect on March's values, do you think?
What you can get in sort of previous years is franchise dealers become a little bit disengaged with the used car market while they're concentrating on new. I think because they've made such good profits over the last few years in used cars, that they're remaining engaged in the used car market. It's their bread and butter. So they are engaged and they are buying, and there's a shortage of cars out there because of the 2 million plus less registrations than you would normally expect because of semiconductors after the COVID pandemic. So it's it's strong. March is strong, but it's not something that we would particularly think It's not particularly untoward, but it is on the strong side.
Mm. Let's go back to one of those other points you made when we started about older vehicles. I mean, older vehicles have been, well, I do remember talking to you in the past that older vehicles have been quite strong. So is this a change that they've started to fall in value?
Yeah, they've been strong so far this year. There was a little bit of weakness towards the end of last year. As that cheaper end is sort of bread and butter for maybe sort of the independents looking at that, and especially with prices having gone up by so much that you might have to go older to get your price points. So yeah, it is a little bit of a change, but they can't keep going up. And also what we're seeing is it's not just not just because they're older and cheaper, but people aren't particularly wanting to buy work at the moment. Dealers want to buy cars that they can turn around quite quickly. Their margins have been slightly affected recently by wholesale prices going up and being unable to push retail prices up because they're already high, because there's a lot of competition. So they don't want to buy cars that maybe have got an engine management light on, like an electrical problem, mechanical problem, or some cosmetic work needed. So that's sort of affected that cheaper end as well. So yeah, the cars that are going to need to spend a bit of time in a workshop, they're not so keen on those. So again, so that's partly why some of those older cars have been affected in price.
Yeah, and then conversely, newer aged cars they're still pretty strong at the moment, are they?
Well, we're 3 years on from the pandemic, so we're starting to get into that shortage of that 3-year-old car. At younger ages, actually at 1 year, there's been the average movement is no movement. It's a level book, as we call it, from February. But again, lots of moving parts within that. But yeah, we're starting to get into the period now where getting a shortage of 3-year-old cars. There's still a shortage of younger used cars. And when the consumer market is quite buoyant, then dealers want stock. So that's what's kept prices high.
Mm. Well, let's turn to EVs then. I mean, it's interesting what you said about the price rise would have been 0.8% if it hadn't been for EVs. The thing that struck me about what you said, though, is we shouldn't really be lumping EVs all together now. I mean, that's been the narrative for the past 3 to 4 months, hasn't it? The EVs in general have plummeted. This is starting to change a little bit, starting to get a little bit more nuanced. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would agree. There have been some that haven't been as badly affected over the last few months, but all of the headlines have been on those cars that have dropped in value by the most. Obviously the Teslas, what's been happening with their new car pricing as well. So it's all gone sort of into the pot, and yeah, everyone's talking about the big movements that have been made. But yeah, this month we've seen we kind of predicted it because we started to see it happen last month, but the Model 3 now looks quite good value for money. There's plenty of them being advertised between 20 and 30,000 pounds. Some sort of down the bottom end of that as well. So that now looks quite a good value car. We've seen some dealers dipping their toe in and buying those again now. iPace, that came down quite a lot, and that's now stabilized as well. So Model 3, iPace, and also the Audi e-tron. So they've probably been the three that stand out as having definitely stabilized. But there's some weakness in other areas. The Golf Electric has come down over 10%. Corsa Electric, the Leaf, Renault Zoe, they've all continued to drop. And when you sort of talk about 9-10%, that's a big movement in a month, and it's off the back of some previous high movements as well. And when you look at that bottom end, sort of the Leaf, the Zoe, the cheaper cars, but if you're a consumer, you can go in to potentially buy an electric vehicle and realize that on a monthly payment, you might be able to get a Model 3, which is an aspirational car. Yeah. Where does that bottom end need to be for that for that gap to exist now? So, I mean, you're going to be delighted if you realize you can afford a Model 3, because it does remain aspirational. So there's still a little bit of movement to happen, and like it or not, the Model 3 has become sort of the benchmark vehicle for EVs on price. And you have to look at other vehicles around that sort of area to see whether they look too expensive or whether the gap to them being cheaper is wide enough. So it's it's fascinating in that EV world, and I think it will continue to be like that for a while to come.
Yeah, I hadn't really appreciated it from that perspective, actually. I mean, when you're talking about sort of low 20s, £25,000 for a Tesla Model 3, it does make the Renault Zoes, the Nissan Leafs, perhaps the BMW i3s of this world do look a little bit expensive. So, I mean, this has been the fall of the Model 3. I mean, it's well documented, but it's been it's had a huge impact, hasn't it? And one that is well, it just continually amazes me, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's not all because of anything that Tesla have done or anything just to do with the Model 3. It's because volumes of EVs in general have come back into the market in one hit. Consumer demand has dropped away a bit. But it is still there, but it's not mopping up that supply. And you've got, because of the drops that have happened, I mean, the used car market likes the dealers like it to be stable. And when there's been volatility, we've seen dealers with buying bans. We've seen dealers that are just being really, really careful. I've spoken to dealers that would previously maybe have bought 30 or 40 Leafs. They're sort of not looking at that number now. They're saying, well, single figures. Let's see how it goes. So yeah, there's been a little bit of concern there, which has caused all of this. So it's been the perfect storm for EVs, really. Demand dropping away, but it's more that supply has come into the market in droves. For EVs in percentage terms, it's still a very small part of the overall market, but also the prices were high, so they probably needed to have this realignment.
Yeah. Would you say dealers are still cautious on stocking electric
Definitely.
cars? If you know, if they predominantly do petrols and diesels, and they have been having a a little corner of their forecourt with electric cars, are they still cautious, do you think?
They're cautious is a really good word for it, because it's not that they're not buying at all. Some have declined to buy over recent months. Some are dipping their toe back in the water, and as I say, yeah, there's no bargains to be had in the petrol and diesel world at the moment because prices are high. There are some relative bargains to be had in the electric vehicle world, and you look at things like a Golf electric is for the equivalent is actually priced less than a petrol Golf now. So you buy a few grand as well. So yeah, if you're prepared to have a bit of a go at them, but my recommendation would probably be keep it in small volumes for now and see if you can get that consumer demand back. Consumer demand is there, and it will improve and increase, especially as we kind of come out of the winter into the summer. It's a bit warmer, range anxiety less of a thing. So yeah, it will start to pick up, but as I say, there's got to be that relativity of values.
Interesting advice there, Derren. But lastly, I mean, do you think next month we're going to be talking about a small little percentage rise, or do you think we could start to see just a small dip?
I think there'll be a small dip. I think because of Easter, you're starting to get into the holiday period. That can be a watershed, really. People going away on holiday, less buyers out there, less consumers looking to buy a car, and the March volume to come back as well. So obviously the registrations from March, last numbers I heard, the market was up on last year by around 12%. It could even end up more than that up on last year. So, and the fleet industry is getting new car supply now. So those cars will start to come back into the market in more numbers. So you've got prices that are relatively high. You've got volume starting to come back in, and you've got a potential little drop off in demand. But the caveat and all of that again is that there aren't loads of cars in the overall market because we've had a shortage over the last 2 years on registration. So my personal view is there'll be a small stabilization or maybe a small decline in values, but that's nothing unusual for the time of year. We're getting back into more seasonal patterns now in the used car market after sort of 2 or 3 years of really abnormal times.
Well, I look forward to talking this time next month, Derren. But for now, and as ever, thanks very much for joining us.
Cheers. Thanks, James.
Well, that's it for today's Car Dealer Live. Join us again very soon. Bye-bye.